My name is Hannah Collins, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life from a hospital bed. I was 25 years old when I realized that being surrounded by family doesn't always mean you're loved. While I was lying in a hospital room, terrified, weak, and unsure if I would even be okay, my parents, my older sister, and my younger brother were boarding a flight to Dubai. Not for work, not for an emergency. They flew there to celebrate my niece Sophie's 7th birthday in one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. I called them. Once, twice, 10 times, 17 times. Every single call went unanswered. That day didn't just break my heart, it changed who I was forever. And years later, when those same people stood at my front door begging for another chance, they couldn't understand why I looked at them like complete strangers. But before I tell you how that happened, let me tell you how my own family made me feel invisible long before I ever stepped into that hospital. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, in what everyone believed was the perfect family. My father, David Collins, owned a successful construction company. My mother, Patricia Collins, worked as a real estate agent. My older sister, Rebecca, was always the center of attention. She had the perfect grades, the perfect smile, and according to my parents, the perfect life. Then there was me. I wasn't the troublemaker. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't lazy. I simply wasn't Rebecca. No matter what I accomplished, it was never enough. When I graduated from college with honors, my parents congratulated me, then spent the rest of dinner talking about Rebecca's new luxury SUV. When I got promoted at work, they smiled politely, before asking if I'd seen the pictures from Rebecca's vacation in Italy. Even birthdays felt different. Rebecca always received expensive gifts and surprise parties. Mine usually ended with a cake from the grocery store and a quick, happy birthday. I kept telling myself they loved me. They just showed it differently. At least, that's what I wanted to believe, because admitting the truth would have hurt too much. And then everything changed on a cold November morning. A pain hit my stomach so suddenly that I collapsed on the kitchen floor. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, dialing my mother's number first. She didn't answer. I tried my father. Voicemail, Rebecca. No answer. Daniel. Nothing. The pain became unbearable. I could barely breathe. With tears running down my face, I managed to call 911. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, and as the paramedics rushed me toward Denver General Hospital, I had no idea that the next few days would completely change the way I saw my family forever. Alone in the hospital. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and I watched the streets of Denver blur past the windows. One of the paramedics kept asking me questions. Hannah, stay with me. Can you tell me where your pain is? I pointed to the right side of my stomach. It hurts. He nodded and immediately started an IV. When we arrived at Denver General Hospital, doctors rushed me into the emergency department. After several scans and blood tests, the doctor came back with a serious expression. Hannah, your appendix has ruptured. We need to operate immediately. My heart dropped. Surgery? I'm afraid we don't have another choice. I nodded, trying to stay calm. Can someone from your family come? That simple question almost made me cry. I'm trying. The nurse handed me my phone. I called my mother. No answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. Rebecca. Nothing. Daniel. Nothing. I stared at my screen in disbelief. 4 missed calls. Still, nothing. The nurse gave me a sympathetic smile. Keep trying. So I did. Again. 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 By the time they wheeled me toward the operating room, I had called 17 times. 17 unanswered calls, not a single text. Not even a, what's wrong? I told myself they were probably busy. Maybe they hadn't heard their phones. Maybe they were driving. Maybe. I kept making excuses for people who had never made excuses for me. The surgery lasted several hours. When I finally opened my eyes, everything felt heavy. My throat was dry. My body ached. Machines beeped quietly beside my bed. The room was silent. No flowers, no balloons, no family. Just me. A nurse noticed I was awake. Welcome back, I whispered. Did anyone come? She looked at the visitor log, then shook her head gently. I'm sorry. That answer hurt more than the surgery. The nurse helped me drink some water before saying something that completely stunned me. I did notice your family posted a lot on social media today. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated. I wasn't trying to snoop, but your phone kept lighting up with notifications. She handed me my phone. I unlocked it. The first thing I saw was Rebecca's Instagram story, a video from the airport. Everyone was smiling. The caption read, "Family vacation begins. Next stop, Dubai." My hands started shaking. I kept watching. Another story. First-class seats, champagne glasses, my niece laughing, my parents waving at the camera, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Not one of them had answered my calls, but somehow, they had time to post videos online. Then another notification appeared, a family group photo inside a luxury hotel in Dubai. The caption said, "Making unforgettable memories together." Together. I stared at that one word for what felt like forever. Together. Except for me. I wasn't part of together. I was lying alone in a hospital bed after emergency surgery. For the first time in my life, I stopped making excuses for them. The truth was impossible to ignore. They knew I had called. They simply chose not to answer. I quietly turned off my phone. No tears came. No anger. Just silence. Something inside me had broken. And deep down, I knew that when I walked out of that hospital, I would never be the same person again. The moment I stopped chasing them, I spent the next 4 days recovering in the hospital. Every morning I glanced at the door, wondering if someone from my family would finally walk in. They never did. The nurses became the closest thing I had to family. One nurse, Emily, always checked on me before her shift ended. She'd ask, "How are you feeling today, Hannah?" I always gave the same answer. "I'm okay," but we both knew I wasn't. On the 5th day, I was discharged. The doctor handed me a folder with my medications and recovery instructions. "Do you have someone picking you up?" he asked. I smiled politely. "I'll call a rideshare." He looked concerned. "After surgery, it's usually better to have someone with you." I shrugged. "I'll be fine." For years, I'd convinced myself I didn't mind being overlooked. That day, I realized I had no other choice but to learn how to stand on my own. When I unlocked the front door to my apartment, the silence hit me. No welcome home, no flowers, no card. I slowly unpacked my medication, made myself soup, and sat on the couch. Then my phone buzzed. For a split second, I thought maybe one of them had finally remembered me. Instead, it was a notification from Instagram. Rebecca had uploaded another photo. The entire family was standing in front of the Burj Khalifa, smiling from ear to ear. The caption read, "Best family vacation ever. So grateful for these moments." I stared at the picture. There wasn't a trace of guilt on any of their faces. I quietly closed the app. Then I did something I'd never done before. I left the family group chat. No dramatic message, no explanation, just left. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her first call in almost a week. I answered. "Hannah, why did you leave the family chat?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "Are you feeling better?" Just concerned about a group chat. I took a slow breath. "I had emergency surgery." There was silence. Then she said, "Oh, Rebecca mentioned you weren't feeling well." Not weren't feeling well. "I almost died. I called you 17 times. Another pause. "We were traveling, sweetheart. Things were hectic." Hectic. That was the explanation. Not an apology, not regret, just, "We were busy." Before I could respond, I heard laughter in the background. Music. Someone shouting, "Happy birthday, Sophie." My mother lowered her voice. "We'll talk when we get home, okay? Everyone's waiting." Click. The call ended. I looked at my phone for several seconds before placing it face down on the table. That conversation lasted less than a minute, and somehow, it told me everything I needed to know. That night, I opened my laptop and made a decision. I stopped waiting for my family to choose me. Instead, I chose myself. I updated my resume, applied for jobs outside Denver, started looking at apartments in other cities. If the people who were supposed to love me could leave me alone in a hospital without a second thought, then maybe it was time to stop building my life around people who only noticed me when it was convenient. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my future around my family's approval. I was planning it around my own peace. And I had no idea that one email, arriving just 2 weeks later, would completely change the course of my life. I chose a new life. 2 weeks after I left the hospital, I was sitting in my apartment with my laptop open, applying for jobs across the country. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I was looking for a fresh start. Then an email popped up. "Congratulations! We'd like to invite you for a final interview." It was from a fast-growing healthcare technology company in Boston, Massachusetts. The position was a senior project coordinator role. The salary was almost double what I was earning in Denver. I read the email 3 times just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. 2 weeks later, I flew to Boston for the interview. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. At the end, the hiring manager smiled. "Hannah, your experience is impressive. We'll be in touch soon." 3 days later, my phone rang. "We'd love to have you join our team." I accepted without hesitation. That night, I looked around my apartment. The place held years of memories, most of them painful. I whispered to myself, "It's time." When my family returned from Dubai, they acted as if nothing unusual had happened. My mother called. "Hannah, we're having dinner on Sunday. Don't be late." No apology. No mention of the hospital. I decided to go, not because I wanted to, because I needed one last confirmation that I was making the right decision. The moment I walked into my parents' house, everyone was talking excitedly about Dubai. Rebecca couldn't stop showing photos. "Oh my gosh, Hannah, you should have seen the hotel." "It was incredible." I forced a smile. I'm sure it was. She kept scrolling through hundreds of pictures. Camel rides, luxury shopping, the beach, the birthday party. Then she laughed. "You would have loved it." I looked at her calmly. I was recovering from emergency surgery. The room went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then my father cleared his throat. "Well, thankfully everything turned out fine." That was it. No one asked how scared I'd been. No one asked how I got home from the hospital. No one asked if I needed help recovering. The conversation immediately shifted back to Dubai. I quietly finished my meal. When dinner ended, I stood up. I accepted a job in Boston. Everyone looked surprised. "Boston?" my mother asked. "When are you leaving?" "Next month," Rebecca laughed. "Don't be dramatic, Hannah. You'll miss us after a few weeks." I looked directly into her eyes. No. It was the shortest answer I'd ever given her. But it carried 25 years of disappointment. I hugged no one before I left. As I walked to my car, I realized something. For the first time in my life, leaving didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. 1 month later, I packed everything I owned into a moving truck and drove east toward Boston. I never looked back. They only noticed when I stopped calling. The first few months in Boston were the hardest and the best. I didn't know anyone. There were no family dinners, no holiday invitations, no one checking in on me. But there was also no disappointment. For the first time in my life, my peace didn't depend on anyone else's attention. I poured all my energy into my new job. I arrived early. I stayed late when it mattered. I volunteered for difficult projects that everyone else avoided. My manager, Sarah Mitchell, noticed. One afternoon, she stopped by my desk. "Hannah, can I ask you something?" "Sure. How do you stay so calm under pressure?" I smiled faintly. "After everything I've been through, deadlines don't scare me." She didn't know my story, but she nodded as if she understood. Within a year, I was promoted to Senior Operations Manager. It wasn't just the title that made me proud. It was the fact that I had earned it on my own. No family connections, no favoritism, just hard work. Back in Denver, something strange started happening. My phone became quiet. Not because my family stopped calling, because I had. I no longer called on birthdays. I didn't text on Mother's Day. I didn't remind anyone about holidays. I simply stopped chasing people who had never chased me. A few months later, my mother called. "Hannah, why are you so distant?" I answered honestly. "I'm matching the effort I've received." There was silence. Then she said, "You're still upset about the hospital?" I closed my eyes. "Still?" I took a slow breath. "I called 17 times. She sighed. "You have to let things go. Families make mistakes." "No, Mom," I said quietly. "Mistakes happen once. Choices happen 17 times. She had no answer. Before hanging up, she said, "You've changed." I looked out the window at the Boston skyline. You're right. I have. The following year, I bought my first condo. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't luxurious. But every payment came from my own hard work. As I unlocked the front door for the first time, I smiled. This place wasn't just a home. It was proof that I could build a life without waiting for anyone's approval. That evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee. Instead of feeling lonely, I felt free. The girl who cried alone in a hospital bed was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally understood her own worth. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't seeking revenge. The greatest revenge was that I no longer needed the people who had made me feel invisible. But life has a strange way of bringing the past back to your doorstep, and 3 years after that hospital stay, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice sounded different, older, worried. "Hannah, I need to ask you for a favor. For the first time in years, my family needed me. They needed me." I stared at my phone for several seconds before answering. My father never called unless something was wrong. His voice was shaky. "Hannah, are you busy? I can talk for a few minutes." He let out a long sigh. "The company is in trouble." That surprised me. My father's construction business had been successful for years. "What happened?" He hesitated. "We lost several major contracts. Costs went up, projects were delayed, and now we're drowning in debt." I listened quietly. Then he added something that caught me off guard. "Rebecca and her husband invested a lot of money in the business. They lost almost everything." For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, he said, "Your mother thought maybe you could help." Help. That word echoed in my mind. When I needed someone to answer a phone call from a hospital bed, no one had time. Now they needed me. "Hannah?" my father asked softly. "Are you still there?" "Yes. We're having a hard time." "I understand. Would you come to Denver? We really need the family together." Family? It was interesting how that word only appeared when they needed something. "I'll think about it." Before he could say anything else, I ended the call. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I remembered every unanswered call, every empty hospital hallway, every night I cried myself to sleep after surgery. Those memories hadn't disappeared. They had simply become quieter. The next morning, I received another call. This time it was Rebecca. She sounded unusually friendly. "Hannah, it's been so long." I almost laughed. For 3 years, she had barely spoken to me. Now suddenly she missed me. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm doing well." "That's great. Dad told me you're doing really well in Boston." "I am." She paused before getting to the real reason for her call. "So, we were wondering if maybe you could lend us some money." There it was. Not "how have you been?" Not "I'm sorry." Straight to money. "Rebecca?" "Yeah? Do you remember the last time I needed my family?" She didn't answer. "I was lying in a hospital bed after emergency surgery. I called 17 times. You were in Dubai." She sighed. "Hannah, that was years ago. You're still holding on to that?" I smiled sadly. "No, I'm remembering it. There's a difference." The line went silent. Then she whispered, "We were wrong." Those were the first honest words I'd heard from anyone in my family, but they came 3 years too late. I replied calmly, "I truly hope things get better for you." Then I ended the call. As I set my phone down, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't making decisions out of guilt. I was making them out of self-respect. They came to my door. A week after Rebecca's phone call, I thought the conversation was over. I was wrong. It was a rainy Saturday morning in Boston. I had just finished making coffee when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Standing in front of me were my parents, David and Patricia. They looked older than I remembered. My father's shoulders were slumped. My mother's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Then my mother whispered, "Hannah." I stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind me. "What are you doing here?" My father looked down. "We wanted to see you in person. You could have called." "We did, but you never answered." I almost smiled at the irony. I know how that feels. Neither of them said a word. My mother wiped away a tear. "Hannah, we're so sorry." I know we hurt you. I don't think we ever understood how deeply. I looked at both of them. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would yell. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt calm. You know what hurt the most? I asked. It wasn't that you went to Dubai. It wasn't even the birthday party. It was that I called 17 times. I was terrified. I thought I might die, and not one person in my family answered. My father's eyes filled with tears. I've replayed that week in my head 1,000 times. I wish I could change it. You can't. My mother reached for my hand. I gently stepped back, not because I hated her, because I had learned to protect my peace. My father cleared his throat. We're losing the house. The business is gone. We've sold almost everything. My mother added quietly, we're not here just because we need help. We're here because we realized we lost our daughter long before we lost our money. For a moment, I believed she meant it. Maybe she did. But some truths arrived too late. I looked at them and spoke as gently as I could. I forgive you. Both of them looked relieved. Then I continued. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You taught me that I couldn't depend on you. So I stopped depending on you. I built a life where I no longer needed your approval or your presence. Tears rolled down my mother's face. So, is this goodbye? I took a deep breath. No, this is acceptance. I hope you have a good life. I truly do. But I can't go back to being the daughter who begged to be loved. Silence filled the space between us. After a few moments, my father nodded. I understand. It was the first time in my life he had accepted my feelings without arguing. They turned and slowly walked back toward their rental car. I watched them leave. I didn't feel happiness. I didn't feel revenge. I simply felt peace. Sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't making people suffer. It's showing them they no longer have the power to hurt you. The truth finally came out. After my parents left Boston, I thought that chapter of my life had finally closed. But a few days later, my phone rang again. This time, it was my younger brother, Daniel. For years, Daniel had stayed quiet. He never defended me, but he never openly hurt me either. I answered, "Hi, Daniel." His voice was low. "Hannah, do you have a few minutes?" "I do." There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "I owe you the truth." I sat down on my couch. "What truth?" He took a deep breath. "The day you were admitted to the hospital. We knew something was wrong." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" He continued. "I saw your missed calls before we boarded the flight. I felt my stomach tighten. I told Mom and Dad you kept calling. What did they say?" "They thought it could wait." I closed my eyes. Daniel's voice cracked. "They believed if it was really serious, the hospital would contact them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They made a choice. Yes, and I made one too. I stayed quiet. He began crying. I've hated myself for it ever since. For the first time in years, someone in my family wasn't making excuses. He was taking responsibility. I was a coward, Hannah. I should have stayed. I should have answered. I'm so sorry. I stayed silent for a few moments. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." He sniffled. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just couldn't keep lying to myself anymore." After we hung up, I sat in complete silence. Oddly enough, hearing the truth didn't reopen my wounds. It closed them. For years, I'd wondered if maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe it was all a terrible coincidence. Now I knew. It wasn't. They had chosen convenience over me. And knowing the truth finally set me free. 6 months later, I received another invitation. It was from Rebecca. She was hosting Thanksgiving dinner and wanted the whole family together. I looked at the invitation for a long time. Then I politely declined. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I had finally learned something important. You don't have to attend every table just because your name is on the invitation. Especially when you've spent years being treated like you never belonged there in the first place. That Thanksgiving, I stayed in Boston. I invited a few close friends from work. We cooked together. We laughed. We shared stories. For the first time in my life, I understood what family really meant. It wasn't about sharing the same last name. It was about showing up when someone needed you most. And that was something my friends had done, long before my relatives ever tried. 5 years have passed since the day I lay alone in that hospital bed. Sometimes people ask me, do you still talk to your family? The answer is, sometimes. Birthdays, a holiday text, an occasional phone call. Nothing more. Not because I hate them, because I finally learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean rebuilding the same relationship. Some bridges are meant to stay behind you. Today, I'm 30 years old. I still live in Boston. I was promoted again and now lead an entire operations team. I mentor young employees who are just starting their careers, and whenever one of them tells me they're struggling or feel invisible, I make sure they know they're not alone. Because I remember exactly what that feels like. I also volunteer at a local hospital a few weekends each month. Every time I walk through those hallways, I think about the frightened woman I used to be. The woman who kept staring at the door, hoping someone from her family would walk in. If I could speak to that version of myself today, I'd tell her, one day, you'll stop waiting for people who refuse to show up, and that's the day your life truly begins. Last Christmas, my parents sent me a handwritten letter. Inside was a family photo. It wasn't a vacation picture. It wasn't a holiday card filled with cheerful messages. On the back, my father had written only one sentence. We think about those 17 missed calls every single day. I read that sentence several times. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Not because it erased the past, but because it reminded me that people sometimes understand the value of someone only after they've lost them. A few months later, I met Daniel for coffee. Just the two of us. He had spent years trying to become a better brother, not with words, but with consistent actions. He never pressured me to come back. He never defended what happened. He simply listened. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a brother again. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant allowing the people who truly changed to earn a place in my life again. Slowly, one step at a time. As for Rebecca, we remain polite, but we're no longer close. Some relationships don't end with a fight, they end with silence. And sometimes, silence says everything that needs to be said. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. The greatest revenge isn't yelling, it isn't making people suffer. It isn't proving them wrong. The greatest revenge is building a life so full of peace, purpose, and self-respect that the people who once ignored you realize they no longer have the power to define your happiness. The day I stopped begging for love was the day I finally found it within myself. So, if you're listening to my story while feeling forgotten, overlooked, or invisible, please remember this. Someone else's failure to value you does not determine your worth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most will disappoint you, but that doesn't mean your story ends there. Mine certainly didn't. My name is Hannah Collins. I called my family 17 times from a hospital bed. They never answered. They flew to Dubai without me. They apologized years later. But by then, I had already built a life where I no longer needed the apology to move forward. And that was the happiest ending I could have ever written for myself.